Imagine this. It's December 1944. The snow-choked forests of the Ardennes are alive with the roar of battle. German panzers slice through the fog like ghosts, catching the Allies off guard in what's about to become the deadliest campaign of the war for American GIs, the Battle of the Bulge. Bullets whip through the trees, tank treads chew up the frozen earth, and in the distance, you hear it, the whistle of incoming shells. But these aren't just any shells. No, these are American 105s and 155s, loaded with a secret so devastating, so game-changing, that one batch of 20,000 alone would turn the tide of slaughter. The Japanese? They never saw it coming either, not in the sweltering jungles of Guadalcanal, not off the blood-soaked decks of carriers in the Philippine Sea. Because what the enemy didn't know was this: a tiny miracle of American ingenuity, a fuse rated to withstand 20,000 times the force of gravity, had just transformed our artillery from a blunt hammer into a razor-sharp meat grinder. We're talking about the Proximity Fuze, or VT Fuse, as they called it to keep the Nazis and Nips guessing. And today, we're diving deep into how 20,000 of these bad boys didn't just save lives, they ended them, by the thousands. This isn't some dry history lesson. This is the story of brains over brawn, of lab coats outsmarting samurai swords and SS panzers. It's the tale of how a secret weapon, born in the shadows of Washington labs, ripped through the heart of the Axis war machine. Buckle up, because by the end of this, you'll see why they called World War II the last gentleman's war, until these fuses turned it into a slaughterhouse. Let's rewind the clock. It's 1940. Europe is a bonfire, and America's still pretending it's got one foot in the isolationist camp. But the eggheads at the National Defense Research Committee, guys like Vannevar Bush, the MIT wizard who basically invented the modern computer age, they're sweating bullets. The Luftwaffe's dive bombers are shredding British skies, and Japanese Zeros are about to turn Pearl Harbor into a parking lot. Anti-aircraft guns? They're firing blind. A typical barrage might take 16,000 shells to bag one plane. That's not war. That's a fireworks show with extra steps. Enter the problem. Fuses. For the uninitiated, a fuse is the brain of a shell, the bit that decides when to go boom. Old-school ones were either impact fuses, which needed a direct hit like threading a needle in a hurricane, or time fuses, which you set like an alarm clock and prayed the math worked out. Against maneuvering planes or troops in foxholes. Useless. Shells buried themselves in mud or dirt before exploding, wasting 90% of their shrapnel. Against infantry. You'd need a direct hit to scratch a guy in a trench. But what if the shell could sense the target? What if it detonated automatically, say, 20 feet in the air, spraying deadly fragments like a horizontal chainsaw? That's the dream Merle Tuve and his team at Johns Hopkins chased. Tuve, this chain-smoking physicist with a voice like gravel, led Section T, a ragtag crew of 150 scientists working in basements and back rooms. Their holy grail? A radio proximity fuse. Tiny radar in a can, bouncing signals off anything big enough to kill. The catch? It had to survive hell. We're talking acceleration of 20,000 Gs. That's 20,000 times your body weight slamming into you the instant the gun fires. Plus, the shell spins at 500 revolutions a second from the rifling. Centrifugal force that'd turn your breakfast into wallpaper paste. Oh, and it had to work in jungle humidity, Arctic cold, and salt spray. Early prototypes? They shattered like cheap Christmas ornaments. One test firing, and the vacuum tubes inside, these pencil eraser-sized wonders, popped like popcorn. But Tuve's boys didn't quit. They encased the guts in wax, mounted tubes in plastic blocks, and invented a thermal battery that armed only after launch. By 1942, they'd cracked it. The Mark 32 Fuse, a thimble-sized miracle with an oscillator, antenna, and thyrotron tube that triggered on Doppler shift. The echo bouncing back faster when you're closing in on something solid. Boom. Air burst. Shred everything in a 50-foot radius. Secrecy was tighter than Fort Knox. This thing was as classified as the Manhattan Project. No leaks, or the Germans, who were tinkering with their own acoustic fuses, would copy it overnight. British boffins had the idea first, but their prototypes were for bombs, not shells. The Yanks ran with it, mobilizing 100 companies. Auto giants like Chrysler and Ford churning out tubes on assembly lines meant for carburetors. By war's end, 22 million Fuse rolled off the lines. But the real kicker? Those first combat batches. Cut to the Pacific, January 1943. Guadalcanal. The USS Helena's screening a task force when 4 Japanese dive bombers, Vals, screaming in low like banshees, pounce at dawn. Gunners on the Helena unleash 5-inch salvos. 2 shells zip past 1 Val. No direct hit, but they detonate anyway, 30 feet off. Shrapnel rips the wings clean off. The plane cartwheels into the sea in a fireball. First blood. The Japanese pilots radio back. What the hell was that? They had no clue. To them, it was like the Americans had invisible tripwires in the sky. Word spread through the fleet like wildfire. By the Solomons campaign, VT-fused shells were turning night raids into turkey shoots. Mitsubishi Bettys, those torpedo-toting behemoths, dropped from 70% survival rates to 20%. One study later pegged it. For every plane downed with time fuses, you'd need 1,000 rounds. With VT, just 250. That's a 4-fold kill boost. And against kamikazes, forget it. Those human-guided missiles met walls of air-bursting death. Historians argue the fuse forced Japan to waste green pilots on suicide runs because their aces were getting mulched. But the real meat grinder? That waited for Europe. Fast forward to the Bulge. December 16, 1944. Hitler's last gasp. 250,000 troops, 1,000 panzers punching through thin American lines. Baston's surrounded Easy Company from Band of Brothers is digging in with frozen fingers, and German artillery's pounding them flat. Eisenhower's desperate. He demands the VT fuses, the ones the brass had hoarded for AA,